Dola penjre sanje ndo parasho sanje chedan zoki chonam la chancho parto dani kyap sanje dage jinso yebe sonam ki dola penjre sanje ndo parasho sanje chedan zoki chonam la chancho parto dani kyap sanje Bhage jinso yebe sonamge, rola panjra sangye robarasho. Simjen damje dewa dan dewe gyudan dembara gyu. Simjen damje dungal dan dungal ye gyudan chawara gyu. Simjen damje dungal mebe dewa minda avara gyu. Simjen damje nyirin chadan nyidan chawara Nyumla nebara gyur Semjen tamje dewa dan dewe gyudan dembara gyur Semjen tamje dungal dan dungal ye gyudan chawara gyur Semjen tamje dungal mebe dewa minda vara gyur Semjen tam nirin chadan nidan cha Nyumla nebara gyur Simjen tamje dewa tan dewe gyudan dembara gyur Simjen tamje zungal dan zungal ye gyudan chawara gyur Simjen tamje zungal me dewa tan minda vara gyur Simjen tamje nyirin chadan nidan cha nyamla nebara gyur Sajibyo Mendo Oedon Reroelin Yeoelegem Andi Sanyejendo Mindembu Doegunanda Jinlai Cheparasha Idamanguru Renamendala Kanyatayami.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy the pure land. Thus meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Yidam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryata Yami.
Pange to Jini Zongwa, the Watanji Bambecher, Tambechin, Tanzebe, Kodamte La Chaza Lo. Yeah. Chumden then doing Nala. Raptunilla, Illa Zunshi dancer soon or Resirwa. Raptunilla, Illa Zunshi dance. Raptunian, the Betsi de Karashikorzena, ne Tim, ne Kabu Badang, ne Timachending in Kundi, Sangore. Raptunian Zidigala, Chanchuki Simbi Zimbachomado, Sindile Jambachene, Numu Weekend, ne Timachingi, Numu Weekend, Kundachene, Chenina Chogumares. And ne young children that they are young, ko ne the Kabuna, ne Nala Ken Rugumarwa, that they are young, and if now at the Abuchimaniana, the Indimenza, Raptunian Zevata, Kanchen, no Timachin, ne Timachin, ne Kabupani Kundi, Sangores. Illa Zoom, Sidigala, Karlagore, ne Jabdalui Kundi, that Mas Zungore. Tempa tempo chene ne pe kang sheba de ngengi tata chene ngengu gres de shibuji ke chambore de na so ore chomdende rab tu nyela ila zungshi dance.
And the Buddha Shakyamuni said within the sutras that one has to listen to the teachings excellently, and one has to hold them within one's mind. And what does this mean, to listen to the teachings in an excellent fashion? This means to be free of two faults. The fault of having the vessel that is upturned, and the fault of having an impurity within the vessel. These two faults need to be purified. And so what does that mean? As far as the vessel being impure, what this is speaking to is that one needs to be free of any kind of mental afflictions as one receives the teachings, but rather one needs to hold within the mind of bodhicitta. And so this will be purifying one of these faults of the vessel, of being an impure, having an impure substance within the vessel. So we should be filled rather than with impure afflictions. We should be filled with bodhicitta as we receive the teachings. And then as far as the upturned vessel and needing to purify this fault, what this means, so for example, if one were to turn over a cup and then try to pour something into it, it wouldn't fill the cup, it wouldn't go in. And in the same way, if although there are sounds out there, but we're not listening to them with our ears, we're not really receiving them and taking them in, then this is like the water pouring over the upturned cup. And so we need to really be receptive and listen to the instructions, and we need to be free of any impurities. And then the second line of that the Buddha taught when he said that we need to really grasp it within our mind, that which we hear, free from these faults of the vessel. And what this means is when we do listen to the teachings and receive the teachings holding this bodhicitta, we also have to have really, really firm mindfulness as to what we're listening to, really listening to grasp every word that is being taught. And so this is what the Buddha had said.
와다 땡디가라 즉 남다 남주 증인제게라 아니 코 내기 현 숨다들 튕긴 두시 쭉 세베 튕긴 두시 쭉 대창과도 빼미스 깨치 모래 대창이나 이 튕긴데 창 현대 잘이나 되니 강에 년시제바데 내도 숨어지 연구로 와 그마다 빼 가버려.
And so in order for us to have everything, all of the factors complete, to do that which the Buddha had taught, in order to really excellently be able to receive instructions and teachings, then we need to be free of what are called the three faults of the vessel. So being an upturned vessel, upside down vessel, which means to not really be listening, to be free from impure vessel, which means to be free from these afflictive emotions. And the third is to be like this leaky vessel, or like a cup with cracks in it, that although something is poured into, it just falls right out, meaning we don't really retain the teachings. So in order to excellently hear them, we need to be free of these three faults of the vessel, and we also need to have the six concordant factors for listening to the teachings, all complete. And in order to really fulfill that which the Buddha said, then we need to be free of these three and endowed with the six.
그런서 남림나로나 빼기 예진게바 여러 해스로와 네 장대 잠지 주고스 뒤서만부 마가지네 수술라 답에 네팔도 빈두시에스 땅부대 랑 네팔도 땅문은 가나서 차당 무숭빈 네팔 우마 차디요래 단지 말이 배정왕 요 진질라 차당 도차 제당 마르겔 콩트로 티기디 저 문도 길길 말해 근데 내가 ran Nepal to be in the cheese, Numum Nelly, Narndegin, the Samtango, Codina, Numum singing the Dungal Tingi or Tonguar. Pemisweke Ketchimore. Tango the ran Nepal to be in the cheese, the Numum in Nekin Nande, but there's something. Tindawe ran Ninji Chede, Mentabu. Kaji, Menzana Nazale Kyop to Gora, Nazale Tagore. men the tata jiragaina tinda we chuti ki tambi chuki menti nyamsulaina suzu naza de ni tinda we rimbuche mentabu samtang gore tambi chuti la mentabu si ani egawe singin la member kebalta busi nyamnyung chenge member na jin ji samtang gore chu shengengi shengen dela range gawe singin dela ani member kebalta samtang ya
And so if you would like to know more about these six concordant factors, then you could look within the Lamrim text and really read in great detail, really extensively understand about these six concordant factors. And as we don't have a lot of time today to go into this, but I'd like to offer you some explanation and instructions on these six, just basically. But if you'd like to have interest in learning more, then please read within the Lamrim texts. And so at first, there are three perceptions that we need to develop, and we need to embrace and really perceive these. And the first one is to perceive oneself as an ailing person that is sick with the illness of the afflictions, these shortcomings and this illness of the afflictions, that basically are all rooted in self-clinging and ignorance. And from these roots of self-clinging and ignorance, then come forth such mental afflictions as desire and hatred and jealousy and so forth, and pride and so forth. And as long as any of those are in our mind stream, then precious realization will not become manifestly evident for us. And we also understand as being afflicted with the illness of these negative emotions, that we ourselves can see that they cause us pain and misery and suffering, the afflicted mental states. And so that's the first perception. We need to see ourselves, those who listen to the Dharma, we need to perceive ourselves as those that are ill with the sickness of the afflictions. And then secondly, that we listen to, the profound Dharma, is like medicine. And so, for example, when you're ill and you're prescribed the correct medicine for whatever the illness or condition, then you can heal, then you can get better. And so listening to the Dharma is the perfect medicine. So we perceive the Dharma teachings as the perfect medicine. Actually, it's really precious medicine because it is that which heals. That's which heals us. And then for those that then administer this the medicine of precious Dharma, our gurus and lamas, our spiritual teachers and spiritual friends, then they are like the great doctors, the great healers who administer this very precious medicine that heals the illness of the afflictions. They are the expert healers. And so as we look into beginning to understand these six, these are the first three perceptions.
Oda men zawe sode nga zo nyamnen jiadri panglang jian ju do jiade tere nendengi nyamsulawa ne tsoin du shis ne ni pe ne le ta ge samudaya tini tijin shabala kibutambi du shis ta tijin shaba somba chomden ne la soba ni pe tigi tatang katala gro sanskrinam tijin shabala oda tijin shabala kibutambi du shingone la manora thinking kibu tamba yang tabare samde same thing ni ngamam shujugi tepalebia tendi yongore tendi ina susula kepenji ragore ani sangi temba de pe yunrinduneya jebala susi nyamnenche kang sheba rang nyamnenche ni jela la any dus chenene pe temba de negirwa yang dabare jasan tin dugala tenda we tu tela tape twinkin dushi tu ngazor nyamnen jege twinkin yunamena de samudana tu detere
Ola so dene pelcher chik lakson dene shipa diserpodo ani ngapa kare ngapa
de tejin chapale kibutambe dushi
la so dene dupa
tempaneva o chuji chapale yulindo neba rang 출진도 전에 윤정부 내야 뺐다가 내야 가르잖아 맞아 녀모비 사동 녀모비 견데 남비 취디 아니베 디기다 상투구도 와 남비 취디기 녀모 로투구도 와 녀모 빵투구도 와 녀모 메아소두구도 와 녀모 되게 둥알 되게도 와 와다 때 둥알 메아서라 number 2 mena metamindu te ngarange nyamlinche enga kangsheba de jenala du sene yunring munigwa the mother nigmarwa yunring to nea tennis sometime the missile catchambore the truth the tape catchashara got you in a te guguar maso
oh lasso And so then the fourth perception, that which we need to perceive and always keep in our mind, is understanding that the profound, really contemplating that this profound Dharma is that which will heal us. Understand that the profound Dharma, sacred Dharma, is what counters and counteracts our afflictive emotions. And so understanding that, knowing that, then understanding we need to integrate that which we have learned as practice. We actually need to take it up. And understanding that it will counteract our afflictive emotions that we see as flaws and faults, and that the profound Dharma is that which will help us recover from that. And so we need to practice the profound Dharma. So it is the remembering that we need to practice the profound Dharma as the remedy to our illness of the emotions. Because if we have, the perfect prescription, the great medicine, but if we don't eat it, or if we don't take it, we're not going to get better, right? So what we have to do is we have to take the medicine so that we can recover from our illness. So constantly remembering to actually integrate and take up the practice, knowing that that's what we need to do in order to heal from the illness. That is the fourth perception. And then the fifth perception is of seeing the one gone to bliss, or the Buddha, as actually a sublime being. And when we perceive the one gone to bliss, the Buddha, as a sublime being, then really great faith naturally will be born within us. So understanding the great qualities of the Buddha, then great faith is established within one. And actually this is to one's own benefit. This is actually the great profit actually that we get. This is the great benefit that we receive, this great faith towards the Buddha. And that's number 5. So always perceiving those gone to bliss, those Buddhas, as really sublime beings. And then the 6th is understanding that and perceiving that oneself needs to practice these teachings, gain experience that is born from practicing these teachings, and then pass these teachings on to others. Because in this way, the excellent teachings will be perfectly preserved and will stay for a long period of time. They will remain for a long period of time. So the Buddha's teachings up until today have stayed, have existed for a very long period of time. And so this 6th concordant factor is for us to see that our own experience as we develop this within ourselves and pass it on to others will actually help the Buddha's teachings stay for a long period of time. And so the Dharma is the very antidote towards the afflictive emotions, because it's within the practice of the Dharma that the afflictive emotions can be abandoned, that the emotions, we can be victorious over the afflictive emotions. We can completely eradicate the afflictive emotions. And so this really gives us, and they give us a lot of suffering. So actually this really holy Dharma is indispensable. In practicing it is what really is of benefit. And then as we pass this along to others, then this is preserving the Dharma. And so this is the sixth. And so these are the six concordant factors that we don't just need to have complete when we're sitting down to do formal practice, but we should always hold these six within our thoughts.
Number sange basidigala nang nyumung la kyundu tan nyumung la nyimbol tan nyumung me azotab jegu warwa nang pa asne tab nang pa sidigala nang nyumung la kyundu tayajire ani nang shibi tangi zangbe yondendu konfeldu tang ngambade me azwe te jeyo ta misiba number sange bita tumu maimbi nyamlin chede teri.
So this is something that is a very, very key point. It's very crucial to understand this because as Buddhists, or in Tibetan, the word for Buddhist is Nangpa, which means one who is concerned with the inner, or the inner world, what is going on inside. Nangpa, this means Buddhist. One who is focused on what is happening inside, meaning mentally, what is happening in our minds. And so we turn within and we recognize that we have these mind states that are afflicted, and we understand that they're flaws. These are really mistaken mental attitudes. So number one, we see them as flaws and mistaken mental attitudes. Number two, we seek to apply antidotes to counteract these unfavorable mind states. And number three, we come to completely eradicate and remove inwardly what is very disturbing and these inner flaws. So this is what it means to be an inner person, one who is involved with the inner dealings. And that's what we're practicing, actually. We practice what is happening inside ourselves. So our practice develops in a twofold way. We are removing that which is undesirable, meaning the afflicted mental states, and we're removing those, and we're developing the positive qualities of the path. So we're working in this twofold manner as Buddhists. And also, this is the practice of Buddhism is a practice that is called the uncommon practice, or extraordinary.
When kaga yorte ko deji nyembuji ten tubina pe dungal ten meji zo tubiya yorwa. Pe miswe ke chembucha diore.
This is really, really so important, because if we do use these anecdotal tools, these antidotal tools, and really counteract the negative mental states, we can completely uproot and remove all suffering for ourselves. And so this is really a very, very key point.
Maranzo chik nana Dr. Kevaji tang nyamyum yogen Dr. Jila sonde tenna teni naza de try garwa gaya doa. Te men Dr. Labana jin men zra twedenche ngoche kangachewe ina dagrwa. Tena jinji ta nambi chwedeng nyamyum jengi ani tomba tushi jengi kanang ani gyagar pentu tezo be ten delsi trash tawagya. Ani tuktotezo nyamnen chene toba yuli kende genji chadi yore. Dini dawalen be nyamnen chene nga zuki ki nyammo de mea so tubiya yorwa. Pe nisi ke chemborda.
And so if we ourselves, if we're sick and we go see a specialist, maybe, the greatest specialist in this disease or this condition, then we'll have great hope that we can recover. because we've really seen the greatest expert on this condition. And then we follow their instructions. We take the medicine that they prescribe. We follow all of the different lifestyle changes, diet changes, and so forth. We take all of the preventative measures that this great specialist has instructed us to do. And we have great faith that we'll recover, because there's no one, who knows more about this than they do. And that's exactly the same when it comes to the teachings of Buddhism. The Buddha was this greatest expert on all of these inner problems, all of these sufferings, the very nature of our existence. And so we have all of these words and instructions of the greatest healer, the Buddha. And then in addition to that, then all of the great Panditas, the Indian Panditas, who then expanded on this in the commentaries. And then we had all of the great practitioners who took up these practices and actually took them on into practice and gained great realization with this practice. And so they've proven actually that the teachings that the Buddha instructed to follow, they work. If you put them into practice, they work. And we should really know and be inspired that if we, as the Buddha instructed, follow this prescribed path, that we can completely purify and remove the source of our sufferings, which is negative mental states. We can be completely free of any negative mental states.
타만내기 때빨라 멘빙아진 제건 아세 도잘로서 니야이 내기 따탑 뮤지고 어셀 숭도와 타말베니 나나 멤버 개발질 때인데 제 나자데 따탑지고 우예나 도차 제당 공동 아gel로서 내리기지 지게자유 아니베 텐데기 추네 가르쳤다 뇽무 이기지동데 따발라 고냠뇽쟁기 남게위 생긴지 때문에 따띠 소아제고 와봐 미시버 개침버다 단단다 디나가서 시야긴 디나라 만체 뇽무 견세지시 연구도 와 당연한서 뇽무 곰바이네 때간디지나 삼삼지 연구로 와 제가 뇽무 시인데 곧께서도 가만히 깨도 됐다고 그래 뇽모데 땅보키야제 지자메게 머리바 아세데 렌지 머리발게 인자 코 뇽모테 현진 차바레
균진
균요겐 집균요겐 거랑 유원의 균요겐 차되어래 아니 가서 되게 누부티거 가서 둥알티거래 가서 둥알 민더바래 둥알 민더나 둥알 만더나 둥알 깨기 유리면서 오르와 유리 깬데기 되면서 오르와 깬데 뇽모래 유리 말이 바래 땡이는 뇽모 땡구도 어떻게 뺏게 좀 버리다
And then earlier on, Geshe says he believes it was in the chapter on vigilance. He's going to check it out for us. Maybe we can get an exact translation. But there is a verse that speaks to what we're talking about here, that says something like, for us ordinary beings who are ill, we need to rely on an expert. Ill with the illness of attachment, anger, hatred, pride, and so forth. And the Dharma is the source of freeing us from the illness of the 84,000 afflictions. To free ourselves from these 84,000 afflictions, then we should rely on the path and the spiritual teacher. And so recently in our last several teachings, we've been hearing this all the time. These words are always coming back to us saying, look at your afflicted mental states and see that they are a flaw, see that they are faulty, see that they cause you suffering. We keep coming back to this. Look at these kinds of mental attitudes and see what they're like for yourself. And so this is really true. We say this in the source of the teachings, but you also may find, somewhere in your week, you look at your mind and see that it's afflicted, and you see that it's a faulty mental state. It is not desirable. And so now we've seen that, we've experienced that, but now secondly, we look and say, where do these afflicted mental states come from? Where does desire, hatred, jealousy, where do these come from? They are rooted in ignorance and in our fixating to any true, concrete, substantial reality. This is really where they come from. And then they arise for us, and they arise in our mind, and we can see that they're the source of suffering. After they arise, what comes next is pain and misery and suffering. They don't feel good. And we don't desire this. We don't want this. We don't desire to suffer. And if we don't desire to suffer, then what we have to do is cut off the cause, that which causes us to suffer. So we have to look back at the cause. And the root cause is clinging to a concrete reality and ignorance, not knowing, being ignorant of the true nature of things. And then so that's the root cause, and then we have the contributing conditions that bring these on, which are the afflictive emotions, are actually conditions. And so this is how it all comes about, and as this is not something that any of us desire, then the next step for us to do is to rely on some kind of an antidote to counteract this from happening, to counteract this.
오다 ten이 내가 단다라마 성의 제말테데 제고 ten이 내가 뱀 미스베게 전부 잡아래스와 세상 아주 다 세상 참데 제바이나 숨주 서구바들이 같이 데비 세파 데세 다 차세레 데세라니 님보때야 다 현주고 간진 도세 생인데 고 현진지레스 데베세 파스디 갈라타 지단에 셀렌 세파니 다 크로와 코르체게 닝삼 장인데 띵이 차고와 띵도갈라 고 견진 차디에다갈라 데비 시빙 니미 삼로다야 데 치고레
And so Geshe says he didn't exactly find that that particular verse, but so anyways, it's okay. We can just move on here. And where we move on, we will take up where we left off after last week. We're in the 8th chapter, and we come to verse 39. Verse 39 is really explaining desire, this passion, this desire, and desire and craving. Looking at this desire, we must see that it is, again, as we've said before, it's faulty. It is a fault. It is not something that is favorable. When it is due to our great desire and our craving that we then reach this link of becoming, which really just perpetuates the cycle of samsara. The cycle of samsara really goes back to what we're talking about in this verse, which is passion or attachment, great desire. So we must see the faults that lie within attachment and craving, or desire and craving. We really must look at the shortfalls, the shortcomings of these.
That Jithin the Dang Parul to Wangs, the Panan Puntal case, the Sipadre, Doce, the Pesipati, Jithin the Dani, Parul Dungi Naya, he can jagris, Pumas, round Puma jagris, Karja Ponzera, Sipa one with Royana, any chick, Tewangi, any Sepatang, Jinwatang, Dekpala Super Tigris. Yungudomazo, Sepatang, Jinwatang, Dekpan in Yebadra. Sepatang, oh, Sepa, Jinwa. And in we damn any pay, Shandro get Dambala Soba, Tendici, Nipa Yungurua. Tantin Duanzo, Loyam Jivi Kingi, and Mimombo Chongano Rodua. The Zurua. And it to pay Kimambu Yungudo. What that is all I got it. Didn't set on Jintanche, Paraldini, Yang Yaso troops, they pay Dungal Mambo and pay Yatana Yawan Roya, Gitendi, Dusha Kenji, the Jenaki, Gizina Kenjini, and in Yawan Roya, the Tendiki, Ling Basaya Yungrua. You wanted that. They la Hundu Tunguare. Inayang also Hun Matona, the Dom to be a cabore. Garzanang also Yawa Toma, Mebanetelo, Combashu Chumboyare, Pacha. The Indigalang also the child Yagan Gumare. Yawanga Mekombe. The child Jedante Zoku, Yagan Gumido, Lab Gumido.
Oh.
What a Combewangi, there's a Combewangi.
And so verse number 39, in this and in world to come, desires the parent of all woe. And so really, craving and desire, desirous and very craving mental attitudes, we absolutely must affix the understanding of them as being something undesirable and faulty. And actually, they really just lead to our own loss. We lose out because of them. Driven by great desire and craving, we are then, we come into becoming and being bound and not being able to be free. They really bind us up. And it's all just from this strong, being overpowered by desire. We end up in being, this link of becoming, and then we are in bondage, we are bound. And actually, if we don't identify and acknowledge the fact that under great passion and desire, when we're really desirous, if we don't identify that as something that is not favorable, then it will be very hard for us to hold ourselves back from whatever it is that we are desiring and craving for. So we must see that this craving itself is a fault if we're going to break the bonds and be able to have willpower to withstand or withhold ourselves from acting out on this desiring and craving. And, we can even see that if you think about sexual misconduct, like sexual predators and, rape and so forth, if these kinds of acts are committed, people go to prison. These things are, actually will be one's own undoing. And so what happens is, under the great power of great desire and hatred, for example, we are then creating karmas and doing actions actually that will cause us to go to the hell realms. And so we must absolutely apply the understanding that great craving is a fault. It is a great fault, and we must really understand that in order to hold ourselves back and withhold ourselves from negative actions and so forth. But this is something that takes work because actually we have really, really thick karmic imprinting where we have these habits. It has really been habituated for a long time, so the karmic imprinting is very, very thick. And actually, this isn't anything we've had to go get a teacher to teach us how to do or study, go to school to figure out how to do. No, we have habituated this. We know this inside and out. We have really very strong imprinting when it comes to this. So we absolutely must apply understand that it is a fault and something we must work against. So maybe I need to read the next two lines. In this world, killing, bonds, and wounds, and in the next, the hells and other pains.
자산다 간지 미게 왔던 탐제 수남마임 디원게 수남마임 빌레 살고와 자산 루비 아리안 대화기 우마지게 바나 수남 멤버 땅불도 저승도 너 세대 메아줘야
Sonam mepa?
수남 마임바 땅불도 수남 마임바서데 미게 빌레 되게 땅불 너 우레스 메아줘 우레스 기비 죽는데 초르도 차단티니 된거래 수남 멤버 땅불도 그래서 여러모제 승성 맞아 수남 마임바 도네 애니베 원투 케버진투벨라 미기추가라니 추투는데 원투 케버진투제 추추투 숨도와 미장보용이야 장보용이라 단단히 고가 맞아 이 유대 맞아 두고라 장모동대야 아니 초화장와서데 록수 초화마임바
건다 장마동이야
장미등한테 땅보래
올라서
되니 로초래 로초 제디가라다 로초라 nga요래
로초세나
로비초아 다베 땡 구순존이 자야 아니 구마게네 자야 자바게네 자야 아니 케빈 총겸네 케빈 첨불래야데 로스는 누구래
올라서
아니 맞아 루이존에 에 초아 튕긴자래 응거와 어다 되게가 로스는 누구래 누가 되죠 누군가 शेगु도 빼미스게 첨부르다 맞아 배 주저 망보지기 땡구순조 아니 배 배자들라 아니 배 덴디지기도 왔대서 야부 말에 최락배 공개하되 딴 싸워니는 말에 야부 말에 최락 공개하네 최락 공개하나 최종해야 되다 야부 말했어
최종해
땡 구순조야 최종해야 돼서 로스 차고 왔다 은송구 유튜브 거래
년송
년송 다가선 여름 보지간에 송도 맞서 때는 진지 냠는 지투에 지고야 빼 미스게 첨버래
So when we're studying the Dharma, then we're always hearing that we need to abandon non-virtuous, unwholesome actions, these actions that are very non-meritorious. And Lopan Aryadeva also said that those non-meritorious actions are the first things that beginners need to reverse, meaning that those negative activities, things that are non-meritorious, when we're first starting out on the path, as a path of practice, we look to abandon that which is unmeritorious. We look to reverse it, turn back these things. And actually, in these recent teachings also, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he was giving the instructions over the last few days, also had a focus on avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions. What we need to do is not to do the 10 non-virtuous actions, and we need to take up the path of virtue, meaning we need to do the 10 things that are very virtuous, because this is establishing the virtuous cause. And so this is something that is very, very important that we need to do, is to abandon the 10 non-virtues and take up the 10 virtuous actions, just as His Holiness was saying. And then also His Holiness turned to focus onto right livelihood. And when we talk about right livelihood, so there are things that we do, we need to make our living, and we need to take care of ourselves and so forth. But we actually need to do this in a very proper and correct way. And these things are actually very, very important for us all to know. And so this is something that would be very, very good for you to know, and also so that you would know what to practice. And so when it comes to right livelihood and so forth, to get the food that you need to eat or take care of your family, then you wouldn't want to do, then what would count as wrong livelihood would be to gain this through stealing or robbing, through cheating others in business and making a great profit at the expense of others, and then using this as your livelihood. So to abandon wrong livelihood is something His Holiness focused on. Also, to be making a profit off of the Dharma. This is also wrong livelihood. And it's said that when you sell the Dharma, when you actually make Dharma a business, then this is actually the cause of the lower realms. And so these are all very, very important points actually that we should all know, so that we can be observing them. And actually we should, really pay heed to what His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, and really live our life in according to that which he has taught.
숨바데 차와돔바레 차와돔세데 타는 무슨 인제 앞에 소 맞제지 소 교야들라 차와돔세데 데레 미기 주인은 소저데 다 침부침불라가 어와 미단데 내라가 어와 단다 디네 차와돔세들 타는 무슨 인제게 소 미제야 되라가 어래 충사 숨바데 데레 지바에니페 연된젠단다 때니페 gembadan tendelo kuishap chedre ngapade karre ani kubi jimbas ani mi jimba tangdugala 통중 캐스 년년 맞아지래 파베 선반남다는 kubi고니 ani jimba tang에 될라고 그래 때마다 가지 이 롱엔데서 방공에서는 캐스 찍으러 와 그래서 육으로 와 근데 찍이야 말했어 kubigonin jingores en tupa de chamba kanga la lo tanyum de chamba tanyum any dede yi tu de nembe gyaina ta mazu talwa khebr tajur khebrjin ta mili khebrjin de tugo are mili chu gana te gyabin nembe gyamna ta mazu mili khebrjin ji tugo are
Gondak that's hakomasong dine di milu keparchen hidrawa karere
chida tag mi lidende mili keparchen
laso
maso tapa thargen yo mili chirbuchin mili palpa mili rimbuche zeyade mili keparchen zeyade mili rimbuche le ko gore
laso laso And dine sewa dom di sumpare pe jibares sumpare
sewa dom de palcha sumbai
sumpa and then when we look at the third point in terms of right livelihood or right action, then we look at avoiding a harmful action, not committing any harm. Usually in the context of the non-virtuous deeds, and we talk about not killing, we talk about kind of the objects of our killing, like we shouldn't commit like homicide, should not be killing other people. But here at this point, this means even down to the littlest, smallest little bug, we should not harm them, we should not kill them. That is the third. So in looking in right livelihood, right action, we look to non-harming even in the smallest of little creatures. And then the fourth is to be respectful, pay respect to those worthy of respect. For example, our elders, elderly people, and so forth. We should be very respectful to them. And then fifth is being respectful in our giving or in our generosity. So although we're generous, and sometimes we are generous because there are others who are needy, we should never look down upon them or see those that we're being generous to as objects of our pity. We shouldn't pity them or think that they're lowly, but rather respectfully give to them. With great respect for them, we offer them our generosity. And there are some who are very, very poor and destitute and needy. Even so, as we're being generous, then we're also greatly, greatly reverent and respectful to them. And number 6, in terms of right livelihood and action, is to have love, really be loving to all, really across the board, meaning equally to everyone, be just loving to all in a very equanimous way, meaning equally loving to all. And then having met the Dharma, then we understand that when we meet the Dharma, we now have complete that which makes this existence a precious human existence. It is once we've met the Dharma that we really have a precious life. Our life becomes very, very, very special and precious. There are different forms of human existence, and we can read about those in the Jewel Ornament of Liberation by Gampopa, Master Gampopa, and in where Gampopa explains that there is a mere human existence, an ordinary human existence, and a precious human existence. And that which is a precious human existence is once we have met the teachings of Sublime Dharma.
어따 되니 되가라 말도 선은 멤버 땅보도 더 우에나 뉴몬로 견도 마도나 선은 마인 빌레 도야 배 가버다 배 모닝 아주 달렘상 빵투 그래잖아 가버래 견도 통이나 근시 뉴몬지 제고 주는 유백은 지거와
라
근시 뉴몬라 땅도 레니나 유백 기회 거니 제외나 니바드 충요래 마셰바제바 뉴베왕기제바 아니 삼진도 마임바제바도 리바제나 리바 충요래 전부야 말해
마셰바
마셰바제바 직제
올라서
근데 삼진도 마임바제바 니래 아니 그래서 우투는 뉴베왕기제야 뉴바찌기 뉴몬은 주바이나 양 니바 충요래
And so, so we must, as we heard in that verse and as His Holiness was teaching about, so that verse by Aryadeva about in the beginning, we need to abandon that which is non-meritorious. And unless we identify and acknowledge that which is faulty and that which is non-meritorious, or those like negative mental states that lead to non-meritorious action, it will be very, very hard to abandon the non-meritorious karma. So we must first see why and identify, acknowledge that it is not favorable and that it is a flaw. And although we say that we're able to completely abandon the negative emotions, the negative mental states, that they are able to be completely eliminated. But that doesn't mean it's easy. Actually, it's difficult. It's not something that's easy to do. And if we just put up with them and let them, come forth as they will, certainly we will not be able to counteract them. But in terms of negative karmas, there are sometimes negative actions that we do that we don't intend to do. We're not even aware that we have done. Or some of them negative actions that we've committed but not wanted to commit, or have really regretted, have great regrets for having done something. In those cases, the impact of that negative karma is lighter, it's lessened. And certainly, regret for doing something, regretting something that we've done really lessens it. But a very, very important part of all of this is to see how the negative emotions impact us negatively, and see that they are faults, they're flaws. Mm-hmm. So always watching what's happening in our own mental state, in our mind state, whatever it might be, whether hatred or anger comes up, some kind of pride, or just ignorance comes up, look at it and recognize not good. That's the first step, looking at it, say, oh, that was not good. That's, kind of like my bad. That was not right. Because until we start doing that, we're not able to affect and impact them to begin to decline, to work on decreasing them. So the first thing we must do is look at the negative emotions that come up in our own mind stream and then say, oh, not good. And that's what will help to bring along the desired effect, which is to really have them decrease.
다 솔로가 집주바대 집주바당 집주지지배 강바 당분이 되게 가르라 거라 다 간진데는 솔로가 숨용도 론다 차세기 론요나양 텔은 디부요 말이지 디부에네 대wan 제는 디부요 말이지 텔 텔라가래 다디 솔로가 집주바대 집주지지바대 때 가르라 거라서 당안한서 부더품에 차바케를 당부 차바제가 드리지에 되게 시고 다 인주란다
아니 가르치네 디 드레보 민게마레
디부 누가 깨야로 마던 디부 대와요 말와
라세
간제가 또 왜든 디부 대와로 와 대와 용고 말와 맞아 누가 대와는 좀 별로시 진저와 누가 유 대wan 징일 로로시지 맞아 대와 용고하러 마도 대와군에 말와 어다 두스레 다디 파절 이게 로샤나 파절 먹어야 말해 포냐 모인 건 강기치도 강기 치투마르 솔텝징 리파 남섬 트라밀라 강기 톤도 만제퍼 지팔라양 다주신 제강 제퍼 제규테 에세 숭도 다데 딜라가 인교 당하나도 김답 숭두가라 땅보고 김답 숭이나다 가레나다 땅보 투인데가 찌찌라 레와데 찌잖네 찌찌데가 못 사준다 단 찌찌 니 타마 아니베 디치거라 따때까지 되시거래.
And so next, so first, next we will look at, we have a verse and a half here because we'll look at the lines of verse number 40 and the first two lines of verse 41. And where we look at what is the experienced result from an act of desire. We will not get a pleasant result. It will be a suffering result. So what actually comes from desire, or what is driven by desire, does not produce a happy result. Actually, the result is suffering from something that we are greatly wanting. And actually, we don't want suffering. We don't want the suffering result. Actually, we want happiness. And that's the kind of result that we want to experience, is that happiness. And so here in our verses, verse number 40, and so a lot of this has to do with the with attachment that comes between in terms of relationships, for example, between people who who are dating or becoming involved in that way. What comes from this attachment to these kind of romantic relationships? And in the text it says, you send your go-betweens, both boy and maid, with many invitations for the prize, avoiding in the quest no sin, no deed that brings an ill renown, nor acts of frightful risk, nor loss of ruin, ruin of possessions. And so, in the beginning, when we're first meeting someone that we're interested in, and in the very, very beginning, we have great hopes, for this developing connection. But in between the time when we have these great hopes and attraction and so forth, and then what we're actually left with in the end, there's, quite a difference.
Raptun dojin yonjena chichi nyangan dromi demin ros sungdo tate ngonerwa ta ngaranzu tande karsore buda bumochi le kiyondikala ta thana chayul ngazu ninjibu shibushi 통보 알아대 갱루세디갈 빠바게데 루고 감포들와 던달라 루고 감포디기 유저리 차디어와
Rico Campos.
루고 tutorial인데 배 샤메교 루고들 갱루라그와
Really? Oh, lasso.
하나띠기 유 차디어와
Oh, lasso. Yeah.
또 던데질라 차게 오늘 율무는 닝제부지 여이나 갱루데 요구라 그지 오늘 그 닝제부지 율무는 얘나 단다 송광대 제주제 그 송광도도 왜 고랍니다.
Ah.
제주제 제보제 그 송광도와 송광
Oh,
코스메틱 그래서 왜 고랍니다. 유르고니 닌지부지 매 인상도 고소고 알아. 땅 아주베 대 차야데 게르르도 차브 지부지 쟁게라레 라레. 뭐래도 와. 아무거나 다나트 뭐마래도 와. 노수 삼단에 간지 차빠 동거야 돼. 빼미스 깨치 모르다. 제가 드니 인디가라 가서 빼 내야 돼 대완도 거래. 대완 되나? 가래. 가르치는 가서 이제 에 된다왜 너바다 방네 차색인 너바다 방네 엔타빌람도 누구 말베 냥데 냥은데 뇽몬진데 뇽몬이 탈인데 인사 타빌람을 누구 와스 영원히 닌지부 숨도와
딩냥데 드네 타빌람
오 타빌람 냥은데 뇽몬진네 뇽몬라 데 인사 답에 타빌람을 ያን 누구 와라 뇽몬을 타빌람라 그상 겨울무 주선선 루두게 티데 빼데문두스 레당 뇽몬 제베타르 레당 뇽몬 남토레스야디 어때서 가서 시야는 양도 삼당 거래 도수 삼당이나 이니 갈래라 땅문이 진도 삼삼지 이니 취재가라 드라이레기리 몇개 첨부르다 가서 네 삼당어도 몇개 첨부래
And so now similarly we look at the two remaining lines in 41 and then all of 42. We look at those together. And so in the text, all for pleasure and the perfect bliss, the utmost penetrating kiss, of what in truth is nothing but a heap of bones, devoid of self, without autonomy. Is this the only object of desire and lust, sooner pass beyond all suffering and grief? So this is, very, very true. We can delve into this a little bit and look here. And we can see, for example, at the first time, as it says in our text, as this boy and this girl are meeting, and there's great desire, and they see each other as so, attractive and desirable. But actually, what is that other person? In the end, what are they? Nothing but just a dried up heap of like flesh and skeleton. In the end, it all comes down to that. That is actually, the true reality of that other person. And so really, what are we attaching ourselves to? What do we find so attractive? If there was anything so real and, kind of intrinsically attractive to that, would it end up just being, as it says, just a heap of bones, a dried up, heap of bones in a graveyard? No. If we think about it like that, there's really nothing so beautiful and attractive about that at all. And you think of all of, all the makeup and cosmetics that are sold, that people, ladies are putting on their faces and, doing their hair and so forth. If they were so beautiful, why would they need any of that if there was anything that was really so attractive and beautifully? So really, what is it that we're so desirous for? What is it that we're so attached to? And don't we want happiness? So if we want happiness, then what is it that we have to really be free from is this wanting, this great desirousness, this wanting. So therefore, what we need to do is abandon this desire, and we need to focus on the path of freedom, the path of liberation, the path of nirvana. Nirvana, actually the meaning in Tibetan of nirvana is passed beyond all sorrow. And this means it is a state that is free of any suffering. It is free of any afflicted mental states. And therefore we need to focus on the path of liberation. Because when we traverse the path of liberation, we become free. And we become free from afflictive emotions. And we remember that verse that we had earlier from Arya Nagarjuna, that liberation is the exhaustion of karma and afflictions. The perpetuation of proliferating elaborations coming from karma and the afflictions and mental concepts ceases by the realization of emptiness. So liberation, the exhaustion of karma and the afflictions. This is what we need to focus on. And if that's, if we focus on that and understand the result of following the path of liberation, then this will be very, very inspirational.
Oda karata bajari jibju jasumba da mare.
Rere.
Jasumba da jibjiba de nika engorda.
Hola so.
Tati thar ngaranzo ta puina pomo chagor pomoina pu chagor tati chapake ta 강가를 집어지게하러와. 다 가레이나 차베 차율대단 차봐 보니까 다 다른 두트도 보러발에 만데시다. 다 subject들이. 다 디나 전주나 마차 부메라요데 이 숭사데 잡아 인상 부메 견데 jogu 거라. 숭사데다 이 부메이나 위 헤빌리디 견적으로 직바지 하나 왕한테 개방이나 부메이나 밤에 그들을 맞두더니 개방 부메지 기요 말와 이티파 자르고 거라 되게 때마다 이 부메를 통중 계속 잡아 말다 저 나란서 류이들 계속 찍어 류이들 통중당 류이들에 배 견도 따고 거라 류이들 원으로 와 밤에 그들을 두고 류지로 와 시부시부 타나 니페 시나 로즈 차야들 류이들와 뒤틀이 깨 류이들 나 시나 류이들 자침부시나 시나도 고배 자침부시 야구로 이 오늘 가서 하고 와도 뺏게 침부르다 어떻게 된다고 류이들에서 다 자유의 류이 잡아보다 자유 류이들 하나님 배 두털을 보라다만 만대버리지. 다때 배 떼라고래. 가시 땅보 메트 텍스. 땅문에 땅보 통인데 지지 통인데가라 지지지라 떨어당그러와. 아, 저 닝제보다 얘도 민도 공도를 나그러와. 메트 따스. 강장 못하 어도데서 아니데 지지지 못 찾는다네. 배 미 오네다 그랬어. 오늘 통한 마통양 외진 동네 요바죠. 그 기념은 돈되니 다른 것좀 기와이 자괴 기살 제통네 달다 지친 배버자스 아니 배 두틀레 포데네 오르이 타마 안베 배 자괴 타네 와던 스탠디기 자기 차거래 스탠디질라 차 가른도 실라거다
And so we reach for liberation, freedom. And we've said that we need to abandon this being attached. And in this particular context, we're talking about the kind of romantic attachment, those objects that other people that we become very attached to in a romantic way. And in the context here, we're talking about males, boyfriends being attached to girlfriends and girlfriends attached to boyfriends. But, whether it's the male to the female or the female to the male, or it all arises in the very same way. It all works in the same way, no matter who is the one that is becoming attached and who are they attached to. It all actually works in the same way. Girls do this to boys, boys to girls, and so forth. It all works in the same way. But what we're looking at is the actual attachment itself. And also here in this text, the way, for example, that they speak about the female in Tibetan, the Tibetan wording that they use in this case, it is a way that is understood to be a female to be kind of a lower rebirth, or kind of a lower, yeah, like a lower rebirth. But actually, and they're also speaking about seeing the impurity or ugliness, within the female body, within the female. But the only reason that they're using the female as an example here is because this teaching was given to a group of males. It was given to this group of male monastics. So therefore, the example that Shantideva is using here is what would likely have been the object of their attachment, or the female form, the female body. And so really what we're looking at here isn't even the female body, because it doesn't matter. If it's males to a female body, it's the same thing with females who get attached to males, or the relationship with, a boyfriend. And it's that clinging fixation to that male body too. So it's all about the body. It comes down to seeing that the body is not this great, beautiful, awesome thing to get attached to. It's impure. And not only that, in the end, it's not even something in and of itself. It is a physical form that came into being based on the substances of the father and mother, based on conception. So it came from, substances of father and substances of mother. There's nothing so all great and dreamy about that. And not only that, when this body dies and goes to the cemetery, it's brought to rot in a cemetery, in a graveyard or a crematorium or a place like this with all other rotting, bodies and forms. And if it was so beautiful and precious, wouldn't it go to such a beautiful place and a precious place? But no, it's brought to the cemetery, the graveyard, where in the end, the vultures and the foxes and so forth just come and have their way with it. They eat it apart. And that's what we attach to, that's what we find so beautiful or so handsome, that in the end only goes to the cemetery or is eaten by vultures. And so in these verses here, we have verses 43 and the beginning. So 43 and 44. What pains you went to just to lift her face that modestly looked down, which looked upon or not before was always with veil concealed. That face for which you languished so, well, here it is now nakedly exposed. The vultures have uncovered it for you to see. What's this? You run away so soon?
Yeah, that sure, but 그저한 군산당한테 제송도 비문하기도 하세.
디낭신.
군산.
단다. Tea break, eh?
Tea break with.
Okay. Tea break now. So let's take a little break. Usually we try for about 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, 다래 말해 다 집주 정아 받래.
알았어.
다 유지하면 정아 받래. 쟁기 루이스는 숨미리 봐세. 다 러와 자율대 차바보되게 자율대 루이디 숨제 미서기 깨야데 된디 온거라 다텔라고래. 쟁기 루이스는 숨미리 봐세. 제니 미켈 타나양 가지 용수 숨기봐. Tisitini tezena serna jenke jimisums wata tesungdoa wata kanji tako mira indi wala ko teni sunu pendo yo mare la gorda
Mm-hmm. And so now we'll start back up, and we are on verse number 45. And 45 looks particularly at the attitudes that are generated towards that object of one's desire and attachment. And the verse reads, "That which you jealously protected, shielded from the eyes of other men, why, miser that you are, don't you protect it now that it's the food of graveyard birds?" And so these kinds of attitudes that we generate towards those objects of our desire and attachment, certainly we can see here in the end are really of no use there. They certainly don't serve any useful purpose.
Yeah, that is Jidu Bada Marve.
Really?
Jidu Bada Yenga Parmiri Bas. Yendak Parmiri Bas. Tai Yenjala Sobatende Lagi Sarada. Shai Pumbundi Tona. Chagwe Jenza Chena. Jengi Zela Metogi. Tanwa Sending Yengi Choice. That Tandang around the Pumpude Shibuji Yenta Chigorwa. Tate Yenta and Ipe Chupachu Ninjabo Shibuji Indo the Chuguarde Tama Tamade Ti Kazuchi Telechevena Wadang any Chagotang Tendigi Zagi Yujire Mado Tila and Ipe Dichevena Nimbuzi Yomarela Gor Kanjita Kanji Chabe Gyunjugor, Tate Kanji, Chapa Child Gyunjugor.
And so in the last verse, then we looked at the ignorance of finding anything to be attached to in the body. And now in the next, this ignorance of being desirous towards the different jewelry and adornments and so forth. And so now this is verse number 46. And where it says, "Look, this mass of human flesh is now the fare of carrion beasts, and you would deck with garlands, sandalwood, and jewels the food and provender of others." And so, usually because the body is so, so special or regarded as something very beautiful. We look to adorn it, to continue to further beautify, to beautify this, this body. But really, in the end, when it's sitting in the graveyard, all it is something for other beasts to come and pick at and chew on and eat. It's certainly not anything worthy of great ornaments and jewels, not so beautiful. Okay, Shejingi Lui?
Mare Zopeliu.
Zepelu.
Oh, Ti Kyunjoni Tele Kyundutani, Zopa Compel to Tanguarwa. Any Shijingi Kaptula, Numuchi Kyunjone, Temba than Shijingi Compel to Tanguarwa. Teni Zundiki Kapta, Lelo. Any pe Lelo Nambasum de gyönjene lelo namba sunde gyöjin imba jene ene zondu kombedo tanji sungdo tatanda something liu kadol so something to be the sungu arde so ran chinjin domya de to inda ran chinjin wang jungwe chase de to domungdo ran chinjin ko shu chumoyena chakbakigo ran chinjin shu chumomena yan chase de chungru go 대체 작바데 라파 근데 따이 따투비나 란친진라 또 순네 두고 와. 그래서 꼬바 개발진도 와. 그래서 레레레레 하고에나 개발진도 와. 그래서 배 미스게 첨부 차대요래.
So really in over the course of this text, the way of the Bodhisattva, each particular section or chapter really has a particular a particular basis of instruction and expression. They all focus on something in particular. And so, for example, when we were studying the chapter on patience, when we in that particular chapter, it really looks at the faults of anger and of how to really apply being a tolerant attitude to counteract anger. So that particular chapter is focused on really ramping up and reinforcing our tolerance. And then the chapter on vigilance really looked at having mindful awareness of that which is arising in one's mind, especially in the context of afflicted mental states. And in order to really continue to have a grip on what's happening in our minds, in our own mental, kind of in our own psychology, then we need to have a presence and a mindfulness, presence of mind to always be watchful of what's happening in the mind. And so that particular chapter also was very, very specific in what we learn there and the techniques that we can develop. And then within perseverance or diligence, in this particular practice, then we learned
Lelo.
Oh, so we had the three kinds of laziness. So we're looking to develop diligence and our perseverance. And in order to do that, we must examine and understand the mind states that are just the direct opposite of being very of lazy and procrastination and so forth. There are three different kinds of laziness that we look at, and we learn to increase and reinforce our diligence. And then here we are in the chapter on meditative concentration, where we look are going to be focusing on developing one's own meditative concentration. And in particular, we're focusing on understanding the self-cherishing attitude. When we have the self-cherishing attitude, it is from our self-cherishing that desirousness and attachment comes from. And so we learn to understand those contributing factors, those conditions that lead to us being very attached and desirous. And therefore, this is something that we look to really decrease and have really on an ongoing basis work at really lessening, but in really understanding the fault of self-cherishing and attachment. So each individual chapter in this text actually has a special focus that can help us understand and train in very particular ways. And so this is really very, very special and important for us to know and understand.
그래서 전주 나나 다 샤페 리우 갑두들라 초바불리아단 텐디 또또 세게 얼마도 때마다 리우망 책이 녀몽이 견 녀몽 간제치 조사서고 녀몽신 간이 견진인지 봐 대세지 숨도와 사이콜로지 뭐마 레도와 좀 된들레 때빠전에 결선함 사그리서 제식입니다. 그래서 하고 가야 돼 백에 침벌다.
아니 샥벨르기 콜라
샤벨리우그 날라다 초바불리아단 텐디 또또 숨거와
그래.
어떤 텐디 숨거마다 때마다 만체 녀몽 견식이도 사이콜로지 뭐네도 이 맞아 따니 애니티 고파칸에도 펜도 가른도 있잖아 아니베 로졸 네베고네 때다고 아니 오늘 랑게 양양도 제바지 양양도 삼다네 아니 간 시샤게데 주제대랑 아니 수수 냠용이 만다게 냠용가라 디 자와테 진이 견 동구였나 수소라투고 와 아니 시대 개발이야 돼.
And so really such the vast majority of this text, with the exception of the chapter on confession, where within that particular chapter we learn about the purification of faults and also is involved with making offerings and so forth. But all of the other chapters really keep coming back to the first thing. And it's really about what's happening within our mental experience. It's really all about psychology, what's happening in our mental experience. And, it's not said here that being afflicted and having negative emotions is anything meritorious whatsoever. It looks at the psychology of what's happening, what are the benefits of, what are the pitfalls, and what are the benefits here that we can, while working within, this psychological realm, and how do the negative emotions impact us negatively, and then what are the benefits of working to counteract these negative emotions. And then also, it keeps going over this and over this, really reinforcing this so that it becomes part of our thinking. We are really always remembering to examine the mind and what's happening in the mind. And again, when something comes up for us, when actually we're in the midst of an experience, that now we can identify that experience. Now we can acknowledge the negativity that's happening in our mind. It is only when we have brought it to our attention and keep it in our attention that we can recognize it, that we can corral these negative emotions. And so really so important, and most of this book is focused on our emotional mental states, on our psychology, and recognizing what's happening within that.
왔다 가래 솔로가 집주집 듬바데 다 신도 지수 지바케기 지라 리그레스 따데 간지 밤에 쿠랄을 좀 되고 리데 엔베 미장을 리데 엔가 간지 닌제부지 통해요 말데 텔리가 지낭 라야기 유지 라진 차그레스 리그레스 루공이도 통하니 민굴대양 켜다나 로라진동 가지양 겨르게는 지민지 저러 송도아 따티 가르 따티 따다라와다 두세니 배우 디지디가라 타마 아니 배 구조 당야메겐 아니 롱규 아니 텐디 차은도가라 연탐부지 차고도아 지나라이 좀 엄마 차고도아 What those Samadane, can't you? Pajo de Mazu Pumbu de la Yagajini Samadana, the Milimuch de Shibu, Chawaja. Chapa Kaya Tontala, Tela Yang, Kyun to Tana, Kyun to Tongajin Yore. Jada, Chapa was a Kyun Chagorwa. What a thing you got a tea. The non doos in any bay, Chapa Goya Tapsila, to do some taiji, soon it is.
So within the next verse, we examine how not only is this body something to not become attracted to, it's actually something that is really frightful and scary. And if we really look at what another's physical form is it's a conglomerate that is made up of the substances that came from their father and mother. And you know, that's what it is. It's just this conglomeration of these substances. And what is there at all to find beautiful in that? Actually, it can be quite frightful if we think about it. And here in verse number 47, we do just that. Look again, this heap of bones, inert and dead. Why? What are you so scared of? Why did you not fear it when it walked around, just like a risen corpse propelled by some strange influence? And so if we look closer at, you know, again, we're speaking about being desirous of someone else. Look at that body. Really, what is it in the end? It's something that just is rotting and decaying. And in the end, that's what it will do. It will rot and it will decay and it will become just really pretty disgusting and scary to behold. If we want to look, you know, at on the good side of, you know, having a physical form or physical form, you know, on the good side, on the upside, then this is something that is really precious. It is the precious human body, something that can practice the Dharma. But on the negative side, we can become very attached and we can become attracted, obsessed, and attached also. And that's on the negative side, on the non-favorable side. But when we look closer, we can really see that it is nothing that in and of itself is anything that is attractive or desirable, certainly not anything that we should be desiring over.
Koiki mayo te gala ta pe ko torfo de dire de koiki yo na ninjibu dua se labina tela koiki yo badalan charan rigmares chikparwa chapa kena chapa cheli de karche gudu chapa de miba zu yi donwal mi guda zu ninjibu ji kanji yo na mena rangi nawani ninjibu tongwarwa ko yulungone ninjibu yerum merum rang luen ma pa to tayong de gala ninjibu ji thongore mi bazu yi to ala mi number dal ka wa number chen chayul da dan chasam tingi ben dal khabo jele de karche ge de nyum dungal ki ve tenji gres dungal samacho dungal do gumarwa chedung dungal ki ve tenji ge na tel chago mi do 생이 고랑 벌어 삼단하지 가로 고기도와 디 너차게 모두 어들이 모두 너차게 생이데
that's so again, so this is really great because we're going through each verse, and each verse is really finding faults in so it's really breaking this down. We have these desires of the flesh and so forth. And And it's really breaking it down where this is nonsensical and finding fault in this. And actually, because of this, we get attached. And so what kind of a function does this, us getting fixated or attached, to someone in that kind of like romantic way? So this attachment to them, what kind of function does that perform? What's happening here? What's happening is the one who is attached, they see that object of attachment, they see that person with their eyes, the eyes see them, and it's something that they regard as beautiful. Now, whether there's any true beauty in that object of their desire and attachment or not is not the case. The one that is regarding them is seeing them as beautiful. That's the first thing that happens. The eyes see something, they see beautiful and desirous. Next thing is attachment to that the eye sensorially found really beautiful. So now the mind of attachment is born. Attachment. Attraction first, attachment comes second. And now what happens is this is the very basis for the arising of the afflictions. And we have to go back and remember, we don't want to be unhappy. We don't want to suffer. And we know the afflictive emotions are suffering. So the basis of attachment is now, so this attachment now provides that which is the basis for the afflictions to arise. And that's what we don't want. And so for that reason, we should not become attached. We should break this cycle. And so actually that is when we look to define what desire and attachment, like the definition of desire and attachment, that's how it's understood and broken down.
Kangla yo gandhi chapa. Tema yorna jimindes. Tela kopa menani yobalani jijikis. The ko pagi pumbu kona rajinde duzu jiji takar mizama jida anibe zoboji ina. The ko labe tarda koeda ninjibuji yorna tele kyuna ni ka ni jak taki ko kyusade ji tagaran Duke the lady or Walla Gorda, you?
Duke.
Oh, that Mizamadi.
Oh, really? Oh,
Chilon Yoshar mother, when none of the Mizamadi dead or they like it. Gigi kids.
And so now we look a little closer. So we just went over how this functions and how the process works by seeing something and then regarding it as beautiful. Now let's look at that which is regarded as beautiful. And we're in verse number 48. You loved it once when clothed and draped it was. Well, now it's naked. Why do you not want it? Ah, you say, your need is no more there. But why did you embrace it, all bedecked and covered? And so, so really this gets down to the heart of things, because when we pull off those layers and look closer of what is really the nature of someone's body, of someone else's, of this, we have this desire for that body, this desire and attachment for them. Actually, when you look at it, the nature is unpure. It's unclean. It is full of all kinds of just filthy substances. Maybe outside dressed up and so beautiful. So the exterior might be, have some attractiveness, to it. It might look good at first, but what's under that skin? What's inside really? It is just, you know, inside is very ugly and filled with impure substances.
Yeah, that what that jirgubate. Tako luida ngone mizama kumbu direde rikcha jamboji duas. The rikcha jambo in a rikcha tela chana rigmares tate laga. Pe jip tabuchun sumudo jiwalagi. Zeni chipu nilane, shangdang kaju gyurnane, tele shangla megajing, kajula so kyochichilga as. The sumudo adati, the kotsi de saboyezan, chitani jumawaji, re, watatenere.
And so now in the next verse, verse number 49, we look further into this more closely. What, you know, that which we have this romantic relationship to, what is it that we're really feeling and experiencing? What's really, is that other person all about? And so verse number 49 says, from food, a single source come equally, the body's filth and nectar of the mouth. So why are you delighted by saliva and yet repelled by excrement? And these words here are pretty clear.
What the Tarun Taga Regalam Chamiri Badat, Tarun de Omada Tagarando. Simbal Renan Jamba is that Ripatangorda. Cherija Chagina, Simbal de Pen Jambuores. Simbal Renan Jambai. Nela gawar michepa. Jingen zapa mainji dolden mizam pala mons. Tape shimbalan jambe chanjena shimbalan jambora tel chana digro was lu puga gune ni mizam zan daginjila chaya kare ore se tel labudwa. It's habudwa rigba.
And so in the next verse, this is the ignorance of us, of one getting attached to like the textures and feelings, sensations, we could say, of the other person's body. And for example, how something so smooth could delight us. And in the verse it says, taking no delight in pillows made of cotton soft to touch, you claim the human forms emits no stench. Be fooled by lust, its filth you do not recognize. So again, we're looking at this kind of outwardly, there is this, you know, there is one experience, but inwardly a different experience. And so we shouldn't be fooled and we should not get attached.
다 solo con optungaji bada jibare rekjala chamiri bada te gebkir sungdwa delden ngampa mongpanam singbalen jambang nyarbo chebre minite tela thwa da tu ches ta tonda tere ta doba tendegi tape sem mong degen tenen Tende region Jampole Chagane, Simbal Chan Rigor, didn't into any bay Karscore. Dichan and Digger, Di Dilla any pay Simbala, Tondingergo Marva Chabe. What at the Indugala, any Kina Regala, ni the pay teaching any Regala Charigumi those.
And then verse number 51 also really has us look again at our basis of attachments. I mean, de la shinpa na pokemendo de la shinpa na di poyek Puyakmando the Shimpa, the Shempa.
Dolden Empa, Mompanam, Simple.
Oh, Shimpal.
Oh,
Oh, Shimpal. Oh, lasso.
Simple and Jambayans. Simple rain, simple Tanda Karsore. Cotton the Marete. Cotton wood, like the wood cotton. Then Jampu Shimjira.
Oh, really?
Oh, Tilla and Pe run Tindi, Tilla was a Chagoman, Jambu Migizan, Telechana dig the Walagore.
And then in verse number 51 gives us another basis of reasoning on why, it is nonsensical for us to find, any reason to have attachment due to a smooth, like a texture based on texture, being attached to like these feelings and sensations based on texture, where it says, lustful ones befuddled by desire, because you cannot copulate with them, you angrily find fault with pillows, even though they're smooth and soft to touch. And so basically what's being said here is that if you think about it like a very, very soft cotton, a soft cotton is not a basis for our affection or attachment or lustful desire. And in the same reason, we shouldn't take any reason to be desirous based on the factor of a appealing texture.
Yeah, that do senita kanchi lula kyun staya, lula nimi staya, and chabi yulu tamiria, or that isungore. That is Ngabjunganini, Samper Tobanga, as that with Sanjin do not Yorwa. That is Nyama Jamada Junamare. Hafta Jamala Juna, Digal Jana, Kitutua in it to a Tanzerwa.
Lasso doing upshoot, not ni tanda or tanda sana.
Tanda Ngabjungani the Lab Shaga.
Oh, las.
Ngani Lana, Asum Telana, Garojala Budota.
Oh, lasso. Then Triwa, the tanda the Triwa Trilambe Capsayana?
Tua Tilantana degree.
And so basically what we have been exploring here in these last few verses is we're speaking about desires of the flesh, desire and attachment to the body. So what we've been examining are the faults of the body. Where are the shortcomings and faults of the body? And our understanding that that we regard the body as something beautiful and clean and special when it is not. So looking more into the reality and the faults of this body. And so now we'll stop there as far as the text for today, but we have some time for questions. If anyone has questions.
Dianne, I have a question.
Okay.
What does Geshe recommend as best practices for cultivating loving kindness and equanimity?
Kune tangyom dang jampa ketap ani kari kari ore Geshe la kerangi gongsala naso ani kandres kegore jampa dang tangyom.
Ota Chitani Mazo Chanchuki Sem Joela Tablam Karso, Uni Menga Dun one Chanchu Sem Jonachi
Mengakdun
Uni Menga Dun Ani Rajan Jebegoni Lojonachik and it's Semejigone Lojonga Kanjik Tapsumia. Tap Sumka de la Tambo 로탕염 두베다 숨깔라 문도 도거라 숨깔라 로탕염 마투나 요야요 말에
Sumka.
오다
Sumka.
근데 유니메가 륜고는 장주기 셈 로종기에 난다 셈에 지고네 로종기에 난다 나진 제베고네 로종기에 난다
Oh, lasso.
데 숨깔라 아니페 당고 셈에 지 나는 당염 셈에 때 주고 야르데 냐는 저게라 곰게게라 로탕염 등을로 곰거래
Okay, di sumka di jangchup sem tang mengak dun
유니메가 륜 간지 장주기 셈 종해로
lasso.
유니메가 륜데 Tela yunemenga dunala tanyumda yomare. Tanyumde lamemenga nengore lagore. Lo tanyum de ngula tuk. Teni marshi tuk. Teni tinten tinzo yung chamba gomyare.
Okay, lasso konda
Lo tanyum mio yade kazana niri ni wangi. Ranchola cha chapa. Ranchola cha jinchola dangi orwa. 차당 니 왕기 로당님도 희고 말해. 제장 당부 니린 차당 로데 뇽구거래. 차바데 마 수수 랑초라 차베 차바데 마자 젠초라 담에 당와데 마자 아니 로당님 두야 직순거래.
Lasso.
니린 차당이당이 왜 당님 내버 규지금이데. 니링 예 세들라 도차들이 도차 왕기 수술라 아니베 센타니 보시부진 셔거와 아니 제단데 수술 랑 유전데 제네니 젠라 베 당와디 용거와 와다티 딩이 차당이 당분이 차당이 라 균스타와다 뺏게 쳔버리 자동이는 균노 따마tum나 로땅님이 백하버리.
Lasso. Disapodo yana disumpa.
유니메가 준 거는 땅님 요마르와.
Oh, lasso.
땅님도 님베게 거래서 라메메가 거네 그지시
Oh, lasso.
땅 보고 거래서. 아니 다진 제가 오면 네가 땅님들도 요마래. 지
Oh, lasso.
오다 땅님도 라메메가르서 라메라고 거래. 땅님 고 거래서. 세메 지곰디가라 땅님 세메제데 초게티 있잖아 주구되어라데 띵물로 곰 거래서. 대 라메메가래. 곰디가라 물로 곰. 가제 너차다 제당이라 균들다네. 아니 로땅님도 두고 와래.
Lasso.
로땅님 미워야 돼. 너차다 제당이 기지거래. 너차가 슈고야 짜고 와래 제당 슈고 짜고 와래. 군님께 전부 인자 제당데 저백업도 시우 nem부지 숭도. 단다 너차데 단다 삼den감도 시우 nem부지 숭도. 와다 때도 야니양도 삼당 와다 때 미스베 개침버래.
And so, generally, we have the instructions on generating the mind of Bodhicitta, where there are like many instructions and that we can follow to learn to develop and increase the mind of Bodhicitta. And for example, there are the 6 points or 7 points of oral instructions that we can study, but within those, there is not a focus on developing equanimity that you brought up. And there are the instructions on exchanging self for others, but and then we also have, so we have the teachings on Bodhicitta, the 7 points of the oral instructions, and we have the teachings on exchanging self for others and the 4 immeasurables. But when it comes to developing equanimity, this is something that we need to rely on the Guru's instruction for, the Guru's special instructions for, because although it is mentioned, it's something that we need to learn to develop from hearing the particular instructions from the Lama. And so, but first, what we really, especially in looking at developing equanimity, this non-biased but an equal feeling towards all beings, we think actually back to that prayer that we say in the beginning of our opening prayers, where we say, may all beings have happiness, causes of happiness, free from suffering, causes of suffering, and so forth. And it says, may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. And so there's the key, there's really the key of working on equanimity, being free of attachment and anger. And so we examine that, what's happening in our minds and with our psychology a little bit, and this is really important because we have, those that are near and dear and those that actually we have biased against. Those that are near and dear to us are the sources of us, as we say, we want to be free from attachment and anger. Those that are near and dear are the source of our attachment, and those, those others that we're not near and dear to, then we have anger towards. And so what we have to really do is we have to look at self and other, and we have to work to really decrease any focus on ourselves. So we have to actually understand how to equalize those that are near and dear and those that are not. That's step number 1. We have to equalize them so that we don't have attachment to one side and kind of more averse to the other side. We have to look at them as equal. We have to equalize them. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is that we tend to have more self-cherishing, more self-interest, and not really be interested in others. And to equalize that, then we really need to lessen any interest in ourselves and increase our interest in others. And so that's the second thing that we look to do. So again, may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. So we work against this bias towards our side and or partiality towards our side and being biased against others. And so really, until we do this, we won't be able to equalize and have that equanimity, as you mentioned. And so in working with attachment, as we've been talking about today, we work on our attachment and lessening our attachment, and so kind of being more detached to equalize. And then we work with patience towards those that we don't feel, so we feel the other way, maybe a little bit more averse to. We need to work with our patience so that we, don't have anger. And so, so those are some things that we learn through working with the Guru, the Lamas, and gaining some instructions. And especially we learn to work with our attachment in, towards those that we are partial to within the chapter on the chapter in meditative absorption. Did that help, Laura?
로땅님 미용에다 차당님이 현재 걸어와. 노차다 제당님이.
So if we're not, feeling equanimous about, towards others, then this points to the fact that within our mind, we have preference or attachment to some and aversion to others. This is showing that we have this like preference or attachment and aversion. It's showing that that is still existing within our minds. To those that are near and dear, we feel attachment and preference, and to those that are not, we feel, so actually we don't feel close to them. So it's those that we feel near and dear to, we feel a closeness to. That automatically gives a partiality. We want them closer. We already have a partiality. And to those that, we don't, we're looking actually to distance ourselves from them. And so it's showing that we're having preferences here, that we're not of equal nature. We're not of equanimity here.
칭무수 요마래 매나양 딜로 장알라 인지 민지 로땅념된 장거래서 순거래 델라미 유디 하고 거래스.
So although when working with within this, these 7 points of oral instruction, there is the 7th point, there is an emphasis on exchanging oneself with others. But there is the direct understanding, and it's said that separately from that, one must train one's mind in becoming equanimous. This is like part of that instruction, is that continuing on, we must additionally study and train in becoming impartial, unbiased.
So I guess that's kind of my question. It's like, so the first step is being aware that you are having those thoughts or attitudes toward others, and then in that moment that you are aware, then is there kind of an antidote to apply right then and there as you're experiencing in that?
Okay, lots of these sabudo geshila dene dindres chungna kari chigore pena Tangpo dene drenshi gore tanda ani chakpa kesong yamena dang chak dang yore ani dantarang pe kapsu nyampo karila tengore.
nyampo tengda ta chapa chidi kala yuli idung alta guwara. Ta tangpo chapa kya khatu tala yuli mi idung me alta ta tuya khabore de. 고 녀모 시작에 슈춤보래 윤도 란 차바케 유일데 미상의 공부때 두시네 또또서 윤도 직 상단데이나 그고 kalekala shu chung rue yegetam pengore
laso dane dang wesem
dansem singde ta jenla sewache gora jenla pendoche gora pendojna jen singde katin chembuimba rang jaya de jenla teni ja gormada rang jaya go mindo hasa mindo jemena ni maso kare jenla teni tugudo Tana zeko nalma kandijina minina takpaina karina tezuka gente ne tuguda. Oda dusjene samtabaina. Eni niji miba semjen jenmena nyamtab semjenmena niji ke giden koramindo. Oda tegide samtangore. Ani karsa junjuna tijiwa yang kesangama rosa. karsa chik zangpe yenden richi semchen den kigores yani sangila tepa jenne ngaso sonam danteni kigorde sangila ngaso shiragi semda nyeboche semchen dangwa yuzen yo mares 선제양 아주 초조비 징지레스 숭도 어떻게 됐으면 땅원 있잖아
Zangpe yunten disel bodo de sangegi
상길랑 아주 때빠지는 소남지 사고와
naso.
zem젤은 니지 진행 아주 소남지 사고라 소남 사가 징다 상기의 섬쟁인 란다 임발라 상길라 15주 초도 구 zem젤은 매고에 미도와서 숭 티지와 준준나라
Oh, naso. And so what you can do, let's take, for example, you're having a moment of like a desirous moment. So we have these two sides of being partial and attracted, attached to wanting, being preference to something. Let's look at that first. Right away, look at that object. Examine that object and see there's no intrinsic, wonderful, beautiful, amazing, I want it. There's nothing intrinsic at all. There's those don't exist intrinsically within that object. So immediately you look at that. Now actually in the throes of a desirous moment, you know, of really wanting something, of craving something, whatever it is, this is very hard to counteract in the throes of that feeling and strong emotion. But that's what you do. Look at the object. There is no intrinsic, whatever it is you're finding beautiful, delicious, whatever it is, it doesn't really exist. And so you look at that and that can help to thwart, you know, your own, you know, being in the throes of that emotion. That in that object, none of that is truly there. That's first. And if it's, for example, if it's a kind of a physical thing, you know, with a loved one, then you can just see that actually, you know, look behind the window dressings of the person and understand really what's behind it is very, you know, unclean and ugly excrement and filth and so forth. That helps to break that down. On the other hand, if you are finding, you know, yourself being repulsed by someone or something, or feeling kind of hatred towards them, or, you know, so we're just now on the other side, then you want to feel love. You want to bring up and really arouse a feeling of love and wishing to help them. Even though you're feeling like you don't like them, or you're repulsed or repelled or even angry, feel love for them and arouse the feeling of really wishing to help them. Because actually they have helped us so much. Other sentient beings have been so kind to us. It is due to all others in our environment that we can work on ourselves. They bring things up in ourselves that we can look at and we can then work with. All of the progress that we make on ourselves is based on our relationships with others. And so, you know, and then as far as developing compassion, right, we look to develop compassion within ourselves. We develop compassion based on other people's suffering, based on, you know, pitiful sentient beings or people in really awful, you know, situations. So it's based on them actually that we can develop compassion. So we really look at their kindness. And then there is that verse that we went past a little while ago in regards to this in the same text, in the Way of the Bodhisattva, that said all of our good qualities come about based on sentient beings, and that and then great faith, the quality of great faith develops based on our faith in the Buddha. And so actually all of the merit that we accumulate and the compassion that we develop, and actually the ability to gain enlightenment, to gain Buddhahood, all comes about based on sentient beings. So when we're feeling angry at sentient beings, we can remember this.
이 쇼로가 거쳐이나 하고 믿는다. 샘전남단 야왈라스 상기 추투 나왈라 ялла 귀치 디진도 샘전라면 지출을 숨도 zobeliuna.
So this particular Geshe-la has been looking for the particular number of this verse and hasn't found it. It's within the verse on patience. But again, it says that every good quality that arises for one is based on sentient beings, and the excellence of the level of la.
쇼로고 야다 종합받으래셔.
Okay, so it's
zobbe 쇼로고 야다 종합받.
Okay, sure.
상기
So it's
추투 나왈라.
it's on 115 within the verse, within the chapter on patience, 115. Okay, that's what. Chunga, gyadan chunga
야다 종합.
Oh, laso. Yeso.
샘전 남단 야왈라 상기 추투 나왈라 샘전라 미네 가서 소남지 사거와 상기를 미네 소남지 사거와 상기를 때빠지네 가서 소남 사거와 아니 상기 투비야기 유튜브야라 소남 투비야라 던다레스 상기를 꾸지 디진도 샘전 라민 지수 샘전 라가서 때 데니베 지가 미제다 가르레스 Wata semjenla dusine sonam saya jing imbachi tatuna ini semjenla ngazu dangsim ke de mido yon samarwa.
Okay, Pelcher Injikela Gyadang Gyacha, let's see, offerings made chirpa.
Yat
Okay, Pokela ani sikang tangpo karere?
sagi chutu chayo pa deni 상기 출 semjen namda gyawala 상기 chutu ndawala kare di
Yeah, okay. And so it's
ditumindo itos semjen namda tos goa de remindo chutu chain de remindo de tata norshami.
So he's still looking he's narrowing it down. Haven't found it exactly yet. So maybe we're not 100% sure it's within the within this chapter. Oh, it is in this chapter.
Semchen namdang gyawale sangi chutum dawala gyalla which tijindu semchen lamin jitsu also pui di ige royora tenala dido di tetna ige phabuchene rellelo baragimido.
Oh, okay. It's easily to find it within the Tibetan text, but not so much. Okay.
당이 쇼로가 되 라소는 젤랑의 땅고.
Okay. Geshe-la said when he finds it exactly, then he can send it out.
쇼로 니 페이지들 쇼로가 땅가대요 말해.
Because within the text that he's looking at, although there are the verses, but it doesn't really distinct, there's no numbers on the verses. The whole text is there. The root text is there, but there are no verses. There's no numbers for the different stanzas.
Yeah, that's Tana.
Does anyone else have a question? Well, did that finish up your question, Laura?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, the Mena wasn't Damjada.
Okay.
Oh, Kiso Mambos Zota.
Geshe saying, here we are late again. So maybe if nobody has any questions, we'll finish here.
Chanchu Samcho Rimboche, Make Bana, King Guruji, Kawa Nyamba, Me Kone Gondo, Pewa Rajo, Kari Rave, Kurve Shinkande, Penda Dewa Malin. Chereziwan Tenzin Gato, Jape, Site Pato, Tenguruchi, Jambal Pawe, Chiltra Kemba, Kundo Zampo, Tean Tejin, the Kungi Jizo Valo. The one that Tamjer of Dungo to Sun Shabe Gawatam no Kana Chodonga Padan, Rajan gave the one the Zambo Churcher of Dungo Waragi.
In the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit flows in your person, Chenrezig, Tenzin, Gyaltso, remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits and train to follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good actions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Dianne.
you, Geshe. You're welcome.
Thank you, thank you.